My name is Memuna Lant. I'm the Faculty Librarian for Agri-Sciences. Welcome to this afternoon session on copyright and how it will influence your thesis or your research projects. We have an expert in this area, the head of copyright and these short courses at Innovus, Miss Carol Cat. Hand it over to her. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. As Memuna said, I head up the Copyright and Short Courses Division, which resides under Innovus at Stellenbosch University. Innovus is our technology transfer office and also the office responsible for commercialization of intellectual property. So eventually, as you proceed and become researchers and you carry on doing what you're doing, you may end up coming to our office one day when you have a patent or technology that you're going to possibly want to commercialize. So we are responsible not just for copyright, we do the university's trademark portfolio, patents, design law, anything to do with commercialization of intellectual property. I have the unenviable task of speaking to you today about copyright. And unless you're busy with the thesis and you are aware, or if you've written an article, you are aware there is a thing called copyright. It's not the most exciting topic to talk about, but unfortunately, it's a very important topic because not only are you going to be using other people's third-party content where there are copyright restrictions, but you're going to possibly be ending up publishing a thesis or a dissertation eventually, and you're going to be the owner of your own copyright eventually, and then you are going to have certain rights that you're going to want to exercise. So it comes from two perspectives where you are concerned. That's just to give you the detail of who we are. As you can see on the slide that I've presented, there on the corner is a little C, 2017 Stellenbosch University. And that's quite an important thing when you're trying to claim copyright on something that you've created. The minute you put it into a fixed form, indicate a date, because that means that's the date that was created. So it's an important factor to remember. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to give you a bit of background first as to what is copyright before I start telling what you may and may not use. It's an intellectual property right, and it's got an economic and a moral function. So it doesn't only influence your pocket regarding royalties, but you've got a moral right to say yes or no you want something to be allowed to be used or not. It also grants you as the author a number of exclusive rights, either allowing or preventing others from using your work or their work. It exists on all original, literary, dramatic, musical and artistic works of authorship. So basically your copyright covers all those aspects. So it's a composer of music, it's a musician that plays an instrument. That is all covered by copyright. In South Africa, we have a Copyright Act, 98 of 1978. It was amended in the late 90s, and this regulates our copyright matters. Unfortunately, as you can see, 1978 did not make provision for technological advances. So we're sitting with an outdated Copyright Act. And ironically enough, the Act came under review in 2015, and a new Copyright Amendment Bill was drafted. It got a lot of objection from industry and from institutions. They went back to the drawing board, they revised it. It was published earlier this year, called the Copyright Amendment Bill Draft of 2017. And they are right now busy this week with the public hearings in Parliament. There is yet again a lot of controversy about this new draft. It's giving quite a wide exemption for academic use, but it's obviously influencing the creators of the works with the wide academic use because they're losing royalties. Stellenbosch University did their presentation yesterday under Professor Sadula Karijat from the Chair of Intellectual Property. And Innovus is going to Parliament on Friday. We're doing our submission on Friday afternoon at 3:30 regarding science, technology, innovation, and the effect it's going to have on commercialization. So it's just ironic that we are talking about copyright while they are busy sitting in hearings at the moment. Why is copyright important to you when you're researching or writing your thesis? For a number of reasons. Infringement. There's a thing called copyright infringement. So when you're using somebody else's work without requesting permission, you're infringing somebody else's copyright. You are going to enjoy copyright protection of the work that you are creating. It's automatic. It sits automatically in your work. You don't have to register it like a patent or a trademark. It's there automatically as long as it's in original form and it's in a fixed material, tangible form. You cannot copyright an idea that you've got in your head. You've got to have written it down somewhere and put your little date on claiming that this is when you had this idea. There are no registration formalities, which means there are no fees payable to enjoy copyright protection. It's automatic. Another important factor, if you're a Stellenbosch student registered at our institution doing your PhD or your thesis or your honours or whatever degree you're doing through us, you assign copyright in all the works you're creating during the course and scope of your studies while you're still at Stellenbosch University. And this is an important factor. I don't know if any of you have read the fine print when you're registering, but you agree to assign that copyright to Stellenbosch University. Important to remember when you're going to start publishing, because you don't own the rights to that thesis that you've written. It's assigned to Stellenbosch University. You're going to be publishing eventually, and this is also another important factor to remember. Publishers want ownership, copyright ownership of your work, including electronic print rights. And we caution against granting exclusive rights to a publisher because it inhibits you as the researcher and us as the institution. So we always caution you when you are dealing with publishing contracts to be alert and aware of what you are going to be having to sign and what you're going to be having to assign. Important question, who's the ownership of copywriting materials? Important because the owner of a copyrighted work, according to the Act, is the original creator of the work. So you're the creator of your thesis, you are the owner of the copyrighted work. But you have exceptions. You've got employment, in other words, you work for Stellenbosch University. Anything you've created in the course and scope of your duties as an employee, you've assigned it to Stellenbosch University. You get commissions. I'm the artist, and you come in and pay me 5,000 Rand to paint the following picture. I'm the creator of the original work, but I've assigned the copyright to you through commissioning because you paid for the rights to the work. State controlled. If the state gives you an instruction to draft a paper, a white paper, yellow paper, whatever paper for them, you don't own that paper, the state owns it. And then the other important factor is exception is assignment, which happens in the case of a student at Stellenbosch University. Again, we are the sole owner of the work that you are going to create during your employ or during your studies at Stellenbosch University. Another thing to consider, outside organizations provide scholarships or bursaries to Stellenbosch universities. It doesn't cover the full cost of your studies or research. So you are not within your right to grant any intellectual property rights directly to any outside organization. You have to first go through the channels and the processes within Stellenbosch University. Another important factor, within South Africa, copyright lasts for the duration of the lifetime of the author, plus 50 years after the death of the author. Thereafter, it will fall into public domain, unless you've co-authored, and there are 3 of you that have written the article, and you're the first person that passes on. The other 2, it's 50 years after the death of the longest surviving author when it's co-authored. So it can continue for quite a while. The other factor to remember is that important works with, I would say, reputable authors, big authors, they are not automatically, their work's not automatically going to fall into public domain. There's going to be an estate, and it's going to be transferred to the estate, and the estate will manage the rights. So don't automatically accept work falls in public domain. Okay. Now, the use of third-party content. Third-party content literally means work that you did not create yourself, that you are going to be using for research purposes, for whatever purposes you want to use it. It means you didn't create it yourself. But there are ways and means of using this content that are legitimate. And that's what we're going to try and highlight for you today. In your research, you're going to be collecting data. And if you know beforehand the word copyright in the back of your head, you'll be cautious while you're collecting your data to read what are the copyright prohibitions, restrictions, what's allowable. Because it doesn't leave you to get to the end of your thesis and discover I actually can't use this. I've got to rethink this whole thing. So while you're collecting your data, just be alert and aware of copyright restrictions and limitations, all right? Right, your copyright perspectives on the use of third-party content in your thesis. What are the perspectives? Your basic copyright principles apply. If you didn't create it, you don't own it, there are going to be principles applying to this piece of work. You require permission if you're using any of the following or applying any of the following. If you reproduce, publish, or communicate your thesis in material form, in print or electronic format, and you've used third-party content in it, you are going to need permission to use that content. Why? Because you have now put somebody else's picture, graph, diagram in your thesis. You're going to publish it on Sun Scholar. It's going to be electronic. It's going to be available to everybody out there. But you can't just distribute. You've got to have permission to be able to distribute. So bear that in mind. You're going to need permission. When you take a piece of text and you use or summarize the whole or complete text, you're creating a new form of work from the original. You've got to be very careful with summaries. We've just had an issue with a student recently that was summarizing course notes and textbooks and selling it to other students. And the ruling that came through was that a summary, unfortunately, if you take a 150-page article, you summarize it in 100 pages, you've created a new work of the original without the author's permission. So be very cautious when summarizing a whole text or using a complete text. All right? And that is for any work. It's not just for a book chapter or a journal article. It's any work, the whole work. This is now a complex point, is a substantial part. Our Act doesn't clearly define substantial or insubstantial. And it says when you use a substantial part of a copyright piece of material that's copyrighted. And they don't give you a fixed percentage what they consider as substantial. Because it's not just about how much you're going to be using, the quantity. It's about the quality of what you're using. You could be using the crux of that person's research. Then it's considered a substantial portion, even if it's only 4 or 5 pages. So you're not just going to work on quantity, you're working on the quality of the material that you're going to be using. It's very sticky, it's a very difficult point to try and enforce. We get a lot of requests saying, can we indicate if they need permission for the following? We can't discern what is substantial or not substantial. We're not qualified to do so. And so it's a very difficult point to use, and that's why we rather advise go and request permission. The next one is also a tricky one, using photographs, diagrams, maps or graphs. The general understanding, I've referenced it, it's fine, I can use it. You've got to remember, photographs, maps, graphs, anything that you've created an image is an artistic work. And an artistic work enjoys complete protection for that whole work. You're not going to put half the photo or half the table or half the graph or the map. You're going to use the whole work. It's another tricky part. Even if you have referenced, rather just ask permission, may I please use this in my thesis, and this I'm proposing to distribute it, print and electronic format, and get permission for it up front. Just that's one of the areas where there are huge debates about using these images and just acknowledging. The other aspect is they go and they take a table from somebody's research, they put it in their research, then they amend the information in the table to reflect their results. Have you got permission to amend somebody else's data? I don't think you have. You're going to need permission to amend, and you're going to have to indicate with permission and permission to amend or to adapt. Don't just automatically assume I can just indicate I've adapted it. Just be very careful doing that. The reason behind that being the person that created the original of that table or graph or results, he's got a moral right to be acknowledged. Now you go and amend his data, so you basically could possibly indicate you were wrong. Your data, your research reflected the wrong results, mine reflecting correct results. You're casting him in a negative light. It's his moral right to protect that. So just bear these little factors in mind. Permission is not required. So there are instances where you can actually use something in your thesis and you don't need permission. When you paraphrase or rewrite a small part of the original source in your own words, with referencing obviously the source correctly, problem comes in what's considered a small part. There again, unqualified, undefined, we can't tell you it's a small part. But you will know if you are paraphrasing 4 or 5 pages of a chapter, you're going to get a little bit uncomfortable, whereas if you're just paraphrasing 1 page, you're going to be all right. But there's no set rule, so be careful when you paraphrase. The next point is equally contentious when you're using a substantial part of copyright material, referencing again the original author and the source. We don't have a qualification for what is considered insubstantial. If it's just a sentence, if it's just a paragraph, no problem. But be careful of insubstantial and substantial. You're allowed to quote a small part of copyright material in your work, obviously using quotation marks and correct referencing of the source and the author. You have to indicate that you did not say or state this, it's somebody else's statement. You're allowed to cite a source in your text. There again, Don't do it so that you're casting a negative light on the original author. So you're allowed to say XYZ said in the following article this and this. So don't say results were wrong, I do not agree with him. You can say my results reflect differently to what his results reflected. You're not saying he's wrong, but you're just saying you've got a different result to it. So be careful how you select your words when you cite a source. And then you're allowed to use an individual random piece of data, a fact. The sun is not shining today, that's a fact, it's raining. You can't copyright protect a fact. Information in a telephone directory, you can't copyright protect it because it's a fact. You live at this address and that's your telephone number. So there's certain instances when you can just use an individual random piece of information. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of fair dealing. America speaks about fair use, a little bit different to what fair dealing is in South Africa. Does fair dealing apply when you're using data in your thesis? Our current Copyright Act makes provision for Section 12.1 that you're allowed to use information for research, private or personal use, and allows a single copy of a reasonable portion of the work. Here again, we don't know what is considered reasonable or unreasonable. Consistent with fair use, that's how our Act defines it. So now you've got to determine your thesis is going to be possibly published on Sun Scholar, and you're going to possibly publish it eventually in a book publication in a print format. That's not personal or private use. That is a distribution. So whether fair dealing is going to stretch to copying and distribution of that work, I very much doubt it. The new exemptions that are coming through, we're waiting because there's a big section now on fair dealing. We don't know if it's going to go through. The problem is they're making it such fair dealing that it's so open and so wide that it's actually compromising the creators of the work. So that's what's under discussion at the moment. It's generally accepted that copying of a whole or a major portion of a work is not compatible with fair dealing principles. The other thing to please note, this provision is in the current Act, not the new bill. The current Act is not clearly defined. There are a lot of grey areas, so you cannot rely on it if you're caught with a copyright infringement law case suit against you. Don't rely on this provision since it's not clearly defined. And you may be allowed to copy reasonable amounts for your purposes of research, for your thesis, but be careful because of your distribution. Your fair dealing provision is not going to stretch to distribution, which is your print and your electronic distribution of your thesis. So bear that in mind. Now we have two issues, plagiarism and copyright. When am I plagiarizing? When am I infringing? It's quite simple. Plagiarism is when you don't say where you took it from. Copyright infringement is when you take it but you don't ask permission to do so. So even if you're indicating where you took it from, you haven't got permission to use it. So that's the difference, all right? Then you have a situation where we have plagiarism and infringement, and that is when you take it without permission and you pass it off as your own work. So there's no acknowledgement, I created this and it was used without permission. All right? This breaks it down further for you. Plagiarism is violation of a moral right and of academic standards. Copyright infringement is a legal violation. You will be sued for copyright infringement. Plagiarism involves verbal or written copying of the original. So you go and you put it on your you put it into your computer, but you don't acknowledge, you just write down the original. Copyright infringement involves physical reproduction. You're either going to copy it onto your computer, PDF it, or you're going to push it through a print machine and you're going to reproduce copies, photostats of it. You fail to attribute material correctly or your correct authorship of that copied material, that's plagiarism. But copyright infringement is you didn't obtain permission and in certain instances you haven't paid the fee to use it because they may ask you a copyright fee. So that's your other aspect to remember. And plagiarism is not only infringing your author's work and reputation, his moral right. Copyright's infringing a moral and an economic right because he can potentially lose income because you're abusing his work. So those are your differences between plagiarism and copyright. How are you going to get permission to use work that you want to put inside your thesis? Now it's quite a simple process if your people that you're contacting, that you do contact, do respond. If they don't respond, it could be quite a process and it becomes lengthy and becomes drawn out and you eventually just give up. First place to start is check the terms and use of the material. If you're on the internet, somewhere on that website there is going to be a terms of use, there's going to be terms and conditions, there's going to be something. It's normally in the bottom left-hand corner or the top right-hand corner in very small fine print that you can hardly read it. But if you click on terms of use or terms and conditions and you open it up, it's going to tell you what you may or may not do with the material. The first thing it could tell you is that you may use it for personal, private purposes. It may tell you can use it for academic purposes, which is fine, that's what you're using it for. They'll tell you any commercial distribution you need permission. Now you're in the sticky situation, you're using it for academic purposes, but you are going to eventually publish the book and distribute it commercially. So now you're in a catch-22. Suggestion, rather just request permission just to cover yourself so that if you do intend publishing one day and there is commercial distribution. Your terms and conditions normally tell you what you may or may not do. They may also tell you you're free to use this material, adapt it, modify, do whatever you like with it, acknowledgement required or no acknowledgement required. So that will tell you what you may or may not do with the material. The book chapter will very clearly tell you on the imprint page where the copyright resides and you may not publish, distribute in any format to anybody without prior permission. So check that first. Be aware we do know about open license, open source licenses and open access articles, but you've got different types of Creative Commons licenses and it could also fall in public domain. Go and check what the restrictions are. If it tells you it's licensed under the Creative Commons License 4, go and check what you may or may not do with License 4. You may end up realizing I've adapted and modified and I'm not allowed to. So just, again, check the terms of use for your open access content that you're accessing. Now the important thing is now that you've determined what you may or may not do, now you need to request permission, but now you've got to find out who do I ask permission from. Very tricky when it's a website because it could be a website owner. It's not the person that wrote the article. Maybe he's assigned it to the website owner. Perhaps the person owns it. Your starting point is to go to the owner of the website and ask if you may use. He will refer you if you may not use. It becomes more and more complex if the author has passed on and if rights have reverted back to authors from publishers. So it can become a mission. We're fully aware of that. And we know students give up eventually because it becomes a lengthy, onerous task and you've got to actually sit and write research. And then it falls by the wayside. When you do eventually trace a copyright owner, request permission in writing. Verbal permission is not going to hold. You've got to have it in writing so that if somebody does challenge you on it, you can indicate that you did receive permission in writing from the copyright owner. When you're requesting permission, indicate clearly it's for non-commercial academic use. That's if you're only planning on submitting it here, academically putting it onto Sun Scholar. Be careful if you are going to consider distributing and publishing it because then you're going to need commercial rights as well. Important to indicate that it's for an intranet, i.e. Sun Scholar, that it's an electronic format. These things must all be indicated when you're requesting permission. Why? Because once you've got permission, then you can do all of these things. But if every time you want to publish or do something different, you've got to request permission every time. Follow up continually with the copyright owner until you do receive a reply, even if it's a negative reply. Rather try and get an answer out of the copyright owner. We now sit with the situation. What happens? You've got a big cross next to your name now because I did not receive permission. So what am I going to do now? I've submitted 5 requests. I haven't heard anything. Your next problem is the copyright owner is going to come back and say, I request X amount for use of my work. It could be in dollars, it could be in pounds, it could turn out to be quite an expensive thesis. Then you've got to have a few points to consider. You've either got to remove the material or find something that you are able to use, or you've got to try and paraphrase it, rewrite it in your own words, acknowledging your original source and the author, or you've got to try and reduce the extent of the material that you're using so it becomes an insubstantial part that you're going to be using, and then credit the original source. Be careful there because we can't tell you what is insubstantial. So those are options that you have to consider if you do not hear from anybody or if you do not receive, if you ask for payment. Most cases where payment is asked, the students remove the articles. It's not affordable to maintain it. Now you've been granted permission. Very excited, but just read what you may or may not do with the work when they grant you permission. You must credit the original source. That is normally standard. You're free to use it, please just acknowledge. You have to state if you altered or modified the material from the original format, but only if you've received permission to do so. If you haven't requested to alter it, then you can't alter it. And then use the material in the manner for which permission has been granted. If he's told you you may use it in print format, you go and put it on an electronic website, you're not sticking to the format that was agreed to. So you must just do what you're told to do with the material. You may not alter or distort the original material in any way which could damage the author's moral rights. That's an important factor to remember. Just do not criticize, be negative. You do it in a polite way if you're not in agreement with any of the results that he's reflected. Now you've got through the copyright stages, you've got through submission of your thesis. Your thesis is now lying on Science Scholar, and suddenly you're going to start getting emails, contacts from publishers. We've just seen your thesis on Science Scholar wherever we've picked it up, and we would really like you to publish. And you feel very flattered and you feel very honored, and there are a few things to remember here. You've assigned your copyright and your works to Stellenbosch University. The assignment was on registration, so the first alarm bell must go, ooh, somebody's going to have to give me permission to do so. Your calendar on SU's website, Part 1 under General, gives you provisions regarding format, submission, duplication, and publication. It tells you who needs to give you permission. Your supervisor, your HOD, your dean. There's a process that you have to follow to get permission to publish. Remember that students may not assign copyright in their thesis and dissertations, and that they may not publish in any form other than an article in an accredited academic journal without prior permission of their dean and relevant faculty. Okay? If you're now going to go ahead and you're going to publish your book, we're not going to claim income from any artistic, literary, or musical works we don't claim it. A, because to administer rights and royalties on all the publications that students or academics are doing, you can imagine we're going to need full-time staff to do so. And this is even if the work is created pursuant to your studies or your work. We advise you to contact us regarding intended publications before you proceed with anything. Unless we're able to, legally able to, we will assign either copyright or usage rights. We call it copyright ownership or usage rights in that thesis for that specific publication. But there again, we only act on advice from the supervisor, HOD, and dean. If he says you can go ahead, it's not under embargo, you're free, you can allow this publication. So we advise you to contact our office, and we will try and point you in the right direction and assist you where we can. A word of advice, just as caution when you're publishing. Choose a specialized academic publisher with a high quality end product. Avoid your mass vanity publishers where there are no peer reviews, there are no editorial processes conducted, and that demand exclusive distribution rights in print and electronic format. We have, in the last couple of years, there's a publishing company, they've got a couple of branches. They seem to be targeting students and lecturers via social media, Twitter, Facebook, internet. And the couple of instances that we dealt with, the student has reacted, obviously flattered, and immediately responded. What happens is this specific publisher and its affiliates are requesting at least a 20 to 35% assignment of copyright. We don't assign copyright. That's one of the pitfalls. By the second or third letter in the communication chain, they want your banking details. And so the progress goes. You will eventually possibly get one book publication, but it's not a high-end publisher. It's a mass vanity publisher. So we're warning students and we're warning lecturers. A couple of the faculties receive, economic and management sciences, I think, receive about 4 to 5 requests per week from the specific company to publish students' work. So just be alert to it, because there are people out there, there are predators. Be careful, all right? Your big thing is when you're publishing, you try and achieve a workable compromise between the publisher and yourself and Stellenbosch University. So rather do it correctly from the beginning, and then nobody will be cross with anybody else. And because we are a public research institution and we want wide dissemination of our research, we're cautious with exclusive rights because we're not comfortable granting an exclusive right, which could be restrictive not only on the institution but on you as the researcher. So that is why we warn you about these things. I've included a couple of links. Apparently the presentation is going to be available. So there are a couple of links that you can access regarding the Copyright Act, Stellenbosch University's intellectual property policy, and then the yearbook regarding your publication of your thesis. And then if you need to contact us, our contact details are available.
Does anyone have any questions for Carol? Yes?
Yeah, I get a sense that the copyright orientation is targeted towards text and graphs, but little consideration to visuals. And in recent times, there's been an explosion of visuals where people are just posting their own images that could actually end up being used for research. And when you begin to track back those images, they get used by newspapers and so forth and so on, and yet you can't track back exactly who owns the copyright. Probably there's no copyright, but you can only reference, but you can't tell where the image came from. So I'm kind of lost here.
Right, you must remember if you use that image and you haven't been able to trace the copyright owner, you immediately going to be held liable for infringement. You can't say, I couldn't find it, or the fact is you still went ahead and used it. Alright? So now you're sitting with an image that you can't trace a copyright holder, a visual that you want to use. You can't trace it. What is your entry point? Where did you find the visual?
Okay, so what I'm saying is it's properly referenced where it came from, right? But then for you to, because this is user generated and someone posted it and, you know, to actually assign.
Be careful of blogs and be careful of you using stuff that people posted it. Be careful of you using YouTube information. YouTube has got quite strict rules what you're loading and uploading, but YouTube very quickly tell you that any data that they're uploading or any images they upload, the person providing the images worries that there's no copyright. The person just says yes and clicks on it. And YouTube have got an indemnity. They will not be held accountable if you turn around and say, I've got it on YouTube. They say they're not accountable for the material posted. So you've got to be very, very careful. If you're using material people post on blogs or on open, let's say their own internet page, you've got to determine, your first step of call would be to ask him, may I have permission to use this? If he knows he's taken that image or that visual from somewhere where he may not have taken it without permission, he's going to turn around very quickly and say, I don't know the rights to this. I can't give you permission. Then you can't just go ahead and reference it and use it because you haven't got permission to use it. And that's what I say, it becomes onerous. If you start scratching at the surface of copyright, you're going to end up down there because there's going to be a right within a right that belongs to somebody else all along the way. And this is where it becomes complex. To give you an idea, we had an issue at the institution about 2 years ago, inaugural lectures. You are doing an inaugural lecture based on your thesis that you submitted. So what are you going to do? You're going to use content from that thesis and you're going to put it up in that inaugural lecture. In your PowerPoint, no problem. You can do it for classroom presentation. What is happening? The university went 2 years ago and we started recording inaugural lectures and we started putting the inaugural lectures readily available on our University of Stellenbosch webpage. And what do you think the next thing is that happens? An inaugural lecture went up with a PowerPoint presentation behind with an image in it for which permission hadn't been given. We had to call in all our top copyright attorneys. We had to find it. The bottom line is, if you're using images in a PowerPoint, you've got to block it out if you don't have permission. Same as here. I've used images. I've referenced it for classroom presentation. When they are going to be posting this recording, I request from them block outside 6, 8, 12, whatever the images appear. That's what you have to do with visual recordings. So you've got to be alert and be aware of it. At the end of the day, what now happens is anybody putting the inaugural lectures really available on our University of Stellenbosch website, they have to sign an indemnity form to say they've cleared permission, that the university will not be held accountable, and that if there is any material going up on that presentation, they they took in Tour de France, or anything where there are sponsorships, there's logos, there's trademarks, it becomes an absolute nightmare to manage. That's why YouTube distance themselves and they indemnify themselves from it. When you are using content for thesis, try and get it from reputable resources. Using blogs and people's critique and comment, you've got to be very careful of. Because you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know the ownership of it. And you're actually leaving yourself wide open. And yes, it's a huge task. We know, we clear copyright, we know what it is to trace a copyright holder. Okay.
You have another question this side?
Sorry, if I may, actually two questions. One is based on the current conversation about if I create lectures for students and I create it in the class, but then it then goes up on SunLearn, that would then technically be an issue. But that's what I'm just asking. Are we meant to do that?
There's a facility you to get permission. As a lecturer, you're free to put display it in
In
class.
class, but not to put it up on
If you want
SunLearn.
somebody who's request permission, it's clear. And you won't be charged a fee because there's a copyright license agreement for the lecturing staff.
And that is done through Innovus.
Innovus doesn't do the SunLearn clearance, but SunLearn, if you want to do it up, should be asking you if there's third-party content. I know they
Maybe
are.
for years.
Between discussions, exactly. They should be asking you, like the library asks when you put books onto short loan, if you put a copy onto short loan, the library asks you for your copyright permission form.
Good to know.
So, and it's not going to cost you a cent, you just got to physically go in and report the use of the copyright because we have a blanket license agreement.
Wow.
Other thing that you're asking, remember students sitting in class with cell phones and
Yeah,
iPads
take videos.
and their photograph.
Yeah.
We've had an issue there as well with faculty. We had to bring in all the iPads and we had to take the material off the iPad. Because you've got permission to use it for lecture purposes
Sure.
in class. The student doesn't have permission to take a photograph.
So should we then be informing the students that they're not allowed to take
It's your moral right to
videos?
turn around and say, I will prefer if you do not photograph any of my slides, I will make it available through the right channels on Sunday.
Very
It's your
good.
moral right to do so.
Okay, then the bigger question is PhD theses.
Yes.
So my thesis is being written up as published manuscript. What is the implication of copyright when that thesis now goes on Sun Scholar?
How much are you using of the published manuscript?
It's the entire, well, my thesis is basically 5 published manuscripts.
And how
Each
much of the
chapter,
manuscript
it's as is, it's verbatim.
do you need permission?
So from the actual publisher before it can actually go on to Sun Scholar.
On the actual publisher. If the publisher doesn't hold the rights anymore, and assign the rights back to whoever created the manuscript, then he will tell you, we no longer hold the rights to his contact the author.
So then technically the university cannot publish my thesis on Sun Scholar.
Not until you've got permission, and they're going to give you a form to say that you've cleared all the necessary permissions when you
Right.
pass it on some scholar. And there are little gateways everywhere
Okay.
which are we trying to protect you. We're not trying to inhibit it. We're trying
Yeah.
to protect because we don't want to sit with a copyright infringement suit against us. It's too
Fair enough.
expensive.
And the last thing is the actual manuscript. Can it be verbatim as part of the thesis, or does it have to be reformatted within the thesis itself? Because I've
That
heard
was
various,
going to look. It was going to
various
look in your
takes
issue
on that.
calendar on your format and how
Okay.
you're allowed to present and how you're going to present. There's a whole description of how you're going to present third-party content. So you just going to have a look
Okay.
at that.
Well, technically it's my content because I'm the primary author of the article.
Okay.
But I'm now using that same content as part of my thesis. And the university, as far as I'm aware, because I've asked at faculty level,
The
Well, faculty
your
doesn't have a
thesis for
prescription.
submission should be according to the prescribed indication.
but our faculty doesn't have a prescription on theses by papers. They've only got traditional theses. So I'm kind of stuck between how do I now provide content of published work, which is my own work, now as part of my
sourced via email, assuming you can ask permission via email. Do you have
It's
some?
mainly via emails because you can basically keep a record of it.
I, for instance, don't know what I don't know. So, is there in the list of things sources that you have space where it says if you're asking for permission in this instance, you need to ask the original owner the following things via email? Is there a place that I can see? I need to say, okay, it is for an academic purpose, and I will not publish or I will publish. Is there?
Your general thing when you're requesting information is A, to indicate obviously what you want to use. Okay, that's the first step that you've got to indicate. Then you've got to indicate how you're going to use it, how you're proposing using it. Are you just using it for research that you're going to need permission, or am I actually going to capture some of this information and put it inside my thesis? Then you've got to indicate that there is a good chance that this could lead to a publication in a print format and it could go onto the internet some scholar. You indicate step by step what you envisage doing with the thesis long term. Get permission for the whole lot up front. Alright? Then you've got the permission. The problem is now you submit it. Let's say you submit it to the website owner where you got it from. Okay? You downloaded this article, you've now contacted the website owner. He comes back to you and says, I don't hold the rights, contact the author. So that's it. Now you've got to go back in. Now you've got to try and trace this author, see where he sits, see where he's more than likely an academic lecturer, where does he lecture, try and trace him through the department of the institution wherever he's based. It takes a while.
I also have a question in terms of IP versus copyright. So, if I do my thesis through the University of Stellenbosch, where does the ownership in terms of intellectual property goes? And so, for example, your thesis becomes later on a company evolving a product.
Then you come to inheritance because then you are using your Stellenbosch University research and you're developing technology and you're going to commercialize your technology because you're going to create something out of it and you're going to generate an income for it. So then you come and speak to inheritance because then it's two-party. You speak to technology transfer officers and you need to speak to file copyright.
Then that's question. That's
And
I just want to ask, if you got permission to use, let's say, photograph for your master's thesis, if you want to use the same again for your PhD, do you ask permission again?
what did you ask permission for first time around?
Pardon?
What did you ask permission for the first time you requested permission?
Let's say you were writing your master's thesis, you ask permission to use a certain photograph, and then if you want to use the same again for your PhD,
You're going to have to request because it's a different publication that you're going to put it into. Okay.
Well, just academic purposes. In the initial, the master's thing,
They're going to ask you, if you request, I want it for academic purposes, they're going to ask you to stipulate what academic purposes. They're going to ask you, they're using it for classroom presentation, or using it for course content, or using it in a thesis. They're going to, you've got to give specific information. Remember, permission is granted for a specific item for a specific use. And the minute you change the item or change the use, you're going to have to request permission. If you've used it and you've requested permission for use in your honours thesis and now you need to use it in your PhD, you're going to need to request permission because it's two different publications that are going to be lying outside a scholar.
How about the use of a music score in the composer has 40 years, and I have performed that score. I have it in a recorded version, and I'm going to use it in an online academic journal as part of an academic article.
Music is possibly one of the most complex rights that you can have because you can have one piece of music and you can have composer rights, you can have artist rights in it, audio. You've got a whole lot of rights residing in one little piece of music. It becomes very complex. The same thing's always applied though. Whoever created the original needs to give you permission. So if you're taking an audio recording and you're going to replace
training for a company, which I did, from the work that I found online. But I did ask for permission. I think this company is in the States. So they said to me, no, you can use it. It's for everyone who's in training. Those are samples. And now this company was asking me to sign the IP, so I said, no, but I don't own the rights to this training. It was just available for everyone. So I didn't get a formal permission. It's an email between me and the company in America. The only thing that's just unsettling for me is when the training now was conducted, I realized that there wasn't a link. You know, when the reference is like acknowledging. So the trainer and me, please, before these manuals go out, make sure that Alice will do that. Now, something coming to me. Do you think then that can get me in the hot water? Because
I'm not
they said no, it's a sample. Samples are there for everyone to use.
All right, you employed by Stellenbosch University.
I'm not employed now. I used to be employed by Stellenbosch. I'm working elsewhere.
You're working elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the content you created was when you were outside. You didn't create it while you were part of Stellenbosch University.
No.
You created when you were employed by the outside company.
I was not even employed by that company. I'm just a
You just
member
created it.
of that
And they
organization.
paid you to create it.
Yes.
Right, so they paid you to create it. Was it their content?
It's not. It's the online content that's available for training companies.
Okay. All right, but you're not a training company.
I was registered as a trainer.
Or you registered as a
Not
trainer?
now. I used to be.
And what were the prohibitions on that online training program? Were you allowed to use it?
I was in terms of what they told me. It's because I was
Were
aware.
you allowed to present the training? Or are you allowed to distribute it further with course manuals and things? That you're going to have to go check. Because you're distributing manuals and you're not allowed to distribute the manuals. You're only allowed to do the course presentation in classroom. But now you take that content and you put the manual out of it and you distribute a manual. But are you allowed to print the content? Originally?
No, in fact, it says at the bottom, you can also produce a certificate. So basically, they give you permission to
Go
register
check carefully
training.
what you may or may not
I
do.
will do.
But you're in no position to give anybody else permission to use it.
No, I didn't.
You can't give permission, firstly. Secondly, if one of the requirements was that you had to acknowledge the material and you
That's
haven't
my
done
one
so,
request.
do you have a list of the people who attended the course?
There is a list. Those
Then you have to print out an addendum or whatever, you've got to get it to them to put inside the course manual.
That's what I
But first check what the course manuals allow you to do and not do.
We have one more question on this side.
Is an email enough giving permission? We should expect something other than an email. When
An
you're
email is not a written permission, as long as you keep it and you archive it. You can keep an email, it's considered a written permission. Don't phone a person and say, he says, that's okay, use my content. You've got no trace of that. But keep the emails. We work purely with email communication with publishers and it's acknowledged, you can use it. But you must just have those words, it's out here by grant permission and just store it on your computer for if ever a dispute does arise.
Any other questions?
Sorry, just for clarity, the lecture slides on Sunlearn, would it be best then to not upload to Sunlearn? Because like you said, in this case, you're going to have to remove all the slides or block out all
I'm not
the slides that
on
contain.
a visual
Okay,
presentation.
so if I have lecture notes that comprise primarily of images taken out of textbooks
questions? I think we've opened up a can of worms for those. For vis in onvis, is that the right word? When you're wanting to know certain things. But thank you so much, Carol, for an insightful conversation with all of us. It was great last year, it's even better this year. And I'm sure everybody's